The next session we're going to be focusing on business. Yes, I'm going to need some more chairs. And we're going to be discussing the topic of from ally to advocate at the company level. So what can companies do internally and then for their external advocacy to move themselves along that journey. And I've got, of course, as always, we have a great panel to discuss. I'd like to invite my panelists to make their way up to the stage. We have Maureen DeRooij, who's the CEO for Asia Pacific of ABN AMRO Bank. Harry O'Neill, who's a partner at Heinrich & Struggles, and also Mark Green, who's Executive Vice President at PVH Corp. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. So this is the third year of our Pride and Prejudice conference. So I guess everyone in this room is already on board with the concepts. We all know that we should be more inclusive and that we need to have better policies. But we may be, based upon what we've learned last year and the year before, we might even have introduced some new policies at our companies. And we know the benefits. We're on board with the ideas that, yeah, people being themselves, more productive, all this kind of stuff. So everyone's already on that same page. What we're going to try and do in this session is get them to that next level of moving into being an advocate. And we've got three business leaders here who I know are going to share with us some of their personal experiences and their ideas for action, and then particularly as business leaders in an Asian context. Maureen, if perhaps we can begin with you. What do you think a leader needs to do to be a good advocate in the Asian region?
Well, it's a lot of different things, and just to stop on the policy front just for a moment, because yes, it's a given, but there will be very interesting surprises if you dig into that. Being ABN AMRO, the values are clear. Yes, of course, the policies are there. Then you really check them. Turns out they're not always there. So I just want to make that point because maybe we all have the false comfort it's there, and then you find out that same-sex coverage is not there in your insurance policies. HIV is excluded. Very easy to fix, but that's what I found when I rejoined ABN AMRO when I came on board. But that's a given. That's your basic infrastructure. The next step is to have a culture where it has become a DNA. And that's not easy. So you have your policies, but then you have to take it to a sort of business as usual, where it's very visible and very explicit. And that, to me, is where leadership comes in. Management, we always call leader, but managers, have to talk about this and have to make it part of whatever KPIs we follow. So yeah, business progress is one, but we're equally interested in how things are progressing, for instance, with the court case in Hong Kong. So if I give a town hall, we do an update on that. We do an update on the activities that we have around this. So it's bringing it from a policy, from a standard to a culture. And then the next step, once you have that, where people feel like, oh yeah, this is the culture here, and you have wonderful moments. We have a Christmas party, partners are involved, and someone comes up to you to say, this is the first corporate event that I bring my partner. And then you know, well, clearly this is a culture. What next? Next, we all have beautiful brands. A lot of the brands here are very well known. We've been in Asia for over 100 years. ABN AMRO is known. It has a credibility. So you can use this very deliberate. So I know that if I use ABN AMRO to sign a petition, that has an impact. A lot of us, for some reason or other, we've reached a certain level, become MDs or CEOs or whatever fancy title. You can use that. You can use your personal position in a company for a certain cause. So I think that is, you have to be aware of that power there. And once you're aware, you use it very deliberate to impact. And in Asia, we have to absolutely do that. I'm not Dutch, notwithstanding the funny accent. I'm Singaporean. I profoundly love my country, but we need to fix a couple of things. They can no longer deport me, so I can speak a lot more. So I can use it on all fronts. I can use my beautiful brand. I can use the position that I'm in, and personally as well, I can speak up and speak out.
And when you talk about using sort of one's personal position as a leader or a senior manager, is that more effectively done in public or in private?
Public. Yeah, private, we can say whatever, you know. It doesn't. Well, it depends how you define it. For instance, in Singapore, I use a lot of private dinners, somewhat workly related, but I never know where the boundaries are. A lot of people you have dinners with, you may have met through work, but they've become friends. And there, it's a very safe environment to bring up, what can we change? What do we have to do? And if that's a government official or a very influential Singaporean or someone in Hong Kong, maybe that's a private event. I definitely use that. And it's a very good space. But I think it's better also to be seen and to be heard. But it has to be natural, you know. It has to come up in you have to have a good occasion. So that's where the deliberateness comes in. You can only spend your time, there's so many hours in the day, so you have to find the right opportunities where it really, you know, impacts.
And you talk about trying to get a very active and explicit culture within AB and AMRO. How do you find that differs between different countries within Asia, particularly, I guess, in relation to the local versus expatriate staff divide?
Well, even in Holland, which is pretty explicit about these matters, more than 30% does not come out. So if you then talk about the somewhat shyer nature here in Asia, as our Japanese panel was alerting to, you have to bring that out. So if we create sort of a business as usual where we discuss events or things happening in the market where we can play a role, that's visible. So I have to do that. Whoever is comfortable has to do that. And I've seen the effect. I've seen the effect of local staff joining the case. If you have Pink Week or whatever event, we do a lot of rah-rah, let's go with teams. And all of a sudden you see people speak up. And they can speak up at home, but they can, with us, they can bring their partner to the Christmas party, they can show the pictures of their spouse after a vacation. But it is because we're very visible about it. This is our agenda, this is what we do in Asia. So it makes it easier, it lowers the barrier.
Okay. Yeah. And Harry, you've worked with a lot of different firms around Asia. I mean, firstly within Heinrich and Struggles, but then also with your clients and the firms that you work with. How does what Maureen says chime with your experiences, and what would you add to that dynamic?
Yeah, it's interesting because I work primarily in financial services, and the financial services industry, which is very well represented on the stage and in the room, are leaders in this area. So we're fortunate in the sense that the major international financial institutions have made great strides, and in some ways, as we've embarked on our own journey internally to build our LGBT plus group within the firm, we've leveraged some of the experiences that we can draw on from those people. But it's very clear, and this has been addressed a couple of times today, that the local Asian institutions are far slower to make changes in this regard than the big international firms who are represented in the room here. And that's something that clearly creates a very different environment, a very different experience for LGBT community members who go to work in those firms. If you're at one of the big American or European institutions, you're welcomed, you're celebrated in many cases, as D&I initiatives have gained momentum in recent years. It's become a great thing. But you've also got a home within the organization. You've got a safe space within the organization. And that doesn't exist in other areas. And this was something that Maureen and Mark and I talked about earlier today, that creation of a safe space in some ways is why we at Heidrick embarked on this journey as well. because I've been with the firm for 11 years, and it's been a very inclusive organization, instinctively inclusive, but not explicitly inclusive. And one of the things that we've found that there's been real value in doing is making things explicit. So just as a simple example within our firm, we now have a policy within our HR and benefits team that every benefit, as it's rewritten within the organization, as things are updated, includes explicit language. When I joined the firm, I asked the question whether my partner would be covered under our healthcare, and the answer was, well, of course he is. But that wasn't written down anywhere. So now when we bring new people on board, they know, because the handbook says that healthcare extends to same-sex partners. And I think that it's a lot of these small steps that change the way that particularly younger and more tentative members of the community, and particularly in this region where you have a lot of cultural issues that prevent people from wanting to come out, and it actually may be a lot easier to come out at work than it is to come out at home.
Yeah. So I'd like to delve into this point you made about the local versus the MNC company, because I think it's a really important one that we probably haven't spent enough time on yet today. So yeah, in the room here we have like a lot of fantastic supporters. A lot of people are from multinationals, particularly in the financial sector, but not only, but mostly it's non-Asian headquartered firms that we see at events. So there's some notable exceptions, which you can see some behind the screen. But how can MNCs approach that subtlety or that potential controversy, right? Because it can be seen as aggressive or meddling or unwelcome interference if a foreign company starts speaking up in another country.
I think you have to choose very carefully how you do that. I think Maureen made some great points about what you can do on a personal level, what you can do on a corporate level. By making it explicit within your own organization and by getting the message across that your organization has these values, and we're very happy to share what those values are, that in itself goes some way towards helping with that. And another thing we talked about, one that was spoken about this morning, was the idea of hunting as a pack. So that the more of us who can do that, and the more of us who can group together, and again, the financial institutions, the legal community are very good at doing this, as we've seen in the court cases in Hong Kong. It does have an impact. If a lot of us get together, if a lot of organizations get together as a group and form bigger groups, present to governments in the region that this is what the international business community expects, then you can make change. And as many of us in the room, and particularly at my great age, have seen a huge change in the world that we live in from our teenage years to where I am now. The journey that we've been on is extraordinary, and the improvements that have been made and the advances that we've had, the idea of marriage equality, which was fantasy back in my teenage years, we can see that advocates over the years made those things happen. So everything that we do, no matter how small it is, everything that we do helps to advance it. And the speed at which it can be advanced will vary. There is resistance in certain parts of Asia to advances in LGBT rights, but we'll get there. But we have to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Mark, to move on to you. So you've spent a lot of time working in the Hong Kong business environment. Do you think that companies here go outside of their own policies enough? Do you think they either could or should be doing more externally, or do they have the balance right?
There's no doubt that the multinational group in this room have great inclusion and diversity strategies, policies, best practices. We could always be better. But we do a reasonably good job of looking inwards and really understanding how do I help our associates and spread the word. But I think there's a lack of awareness sometimes about the need to go beyond that towards that step to advocacy. And I think a lot of it's just down to a lack of awareness about the issues outside of the workplace. I have to look at my own personal example. It was, I didn't come out until I was 50. And I did it because I fell in love, wanted to get married, wanted to have a family, which all happened in the last 4 or 5 years. But until that time, I was very comfortable living in the world that I lived in. And it was only when it became impossible to get a visa for my husband, almost impossible to get visas for my children, and it became personal, that I started to think about how important it is to become an advocate. It's a message that somehow you have to communicate out to people that don't necessarily face those problems themselves, but need to empathize with them. And I really liked a lot of the messaging today. I think the idea of hunting impacts is great. I think there's the banks and the law firms do it very well. They have these associations and they, share a lot and do advocate. But I think there's a lot to be said for the general corporate world getting together and having corporate allies and corporate alliances that go out with targeted messaging. I'd love to see a situation where 50 multinationals in Hong Kong sit in front of Carrie Lam and say, it is no longer acceptable for us that we cannot get same-sex dependent visas for our employees. And see if the force of business is able to influence the government, because I think they will listen to business, and I think business has a very strong voice and a responsibility for their own associates to deliver that messaging.
Actually, Charlie, in his opening remarks, was rightly talking about the sort of erosion of democracy on Asia if we take a sort of continent-wide view over the last couple of years, and some of the challenges that posed. I guess in a sense this can be an opportunity for business, because many of these governments that have been eroding their democracy are still very pro-business, right? And they still do listen to the business voice, and so perhaps that's an opportunity for firms to have more of an impact.
But I think the erosion of democracy is something that they hide behind. The government has it within its power to issue same-sex visas. They don't even have to change the law. They just have to change a policy.
What do you think is the most effective way for corporates to influence government? Is it through legal cases, private lobbying, doing advocacy in public, something else, all of the above?
I think it's a combination. Again, the QT case is very well followed, and I can't remember the legal term, but companies have signed up to support it. So that's clearly a very positive messaging. I know community business are here. They've been doing petitions. I'm on the board of governors with the American Chamber of Commerce, who have just started to move towards advocacy. But I think that there's equally more direct action that can be taken with these corporate alliances, because there's a carrot and there's a stick. The cost of, we were talking over lunch, the cost of doing business in Hong Kong now is huge. I mean, it's as much to employ a local director level person. The salary here is higher than New York. So now we have a choice, and now we need to make it clear to the government that if they're not supportive of our values and our beliefs and our corporate cultures, there'll be other people in this world that will be.
Right. We're going to come back to some more discussion, and I will be giving the audience a chance to come in too, but we're just going to come up for our next poll of the day. If we can just get that up on screen, and if you've downloaded the app, which I'm sure everybody has, right? We can answer the poll in the app. So the third poll for the day, can LGBT advocates make more progress working with or without companies? And this harks back maybe to the activist versus politician dichotomy that was brought up in the policy panel. Is it more effective to be an LGBT activist group working by yourself in civil society, or more effective to have corporates involved as well? So we'll come back to the answer once you've all voted and the team have had a chance to add everything up. Anybody want to jump in and kick us off with questions for the corporate panel? Yeah, over on the left-hand side. Have we got a microphone on its way over, and then we have one down the back after that, and then one over there. Okay, great.
Yeah, so I was just, very impressed with what Maureen was saying about companies coming out and taking a stand. And in India, we saw that post the 377, when the decision was reversed, many companies actually went back into the closet, who had made progress. But some companies chose to have a closed-door meeting to discuss what their strategy should be. And I think that was a good move to do, to have a closed-door meeting. And the only point I wanted to make was that this idea whether, it's seen as foreign interfering, it's good to have local allies come on along with you so that it's not seen as just foreign organizations coming in and telling us what to do.
Yeah, I think, in Maureen, as the real Singaporean and me as the kind of temporary one, I mean, it's always a massive challenge for us there, isn't it? Because it's just impossible to get any of the local companies to say anything public on this. Do you have any experience
I disagree.
there?
I mean, last year we had one of the founders of Pink Dot, and of course, the Singapore government said no more foreign sponsoring. And he was very philosophical. He said that was the best thing that could have happened, because I had to go out to Singaporean companies, and he raised more money. So I think we're underestimating local companies here. And we now will have a great tool, what Kate was saying about these United Nations business standards.
Yeah.
That will unify, and that goes, if we, by the way, I can announce that ABN AMRO is signing up for that. I just got head office approval to mention it. But I think there we will have to make a concerted effort to get local companies to sign up, because we're signing up for human rights. And if you then talk about local laws, they will fall to the wayside. So if we can get really behind that and use our positions, whether it's in boards or in other forums, everyone wants to sign up for that. It's a very safe thing to do. So it's a wonderful tool that I think we can use to further the agenda. Also, and just to look at some hopeful things, from what I understand from the Australian decision to approve gay marriage, it wasn't really the politicians that were in place that furthered the agenda. It was public lobbying that did that. So that gives a lot of hope that we're not just dependent on the ones that we voted for and stuck with for 4 years or forever, but it is impactful. And I keep saying, the company and the position, never forget Rosa Parks. You don't have to have any position. It could be just one person making a stand. So all of the above helps. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a question down the back. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much. It's been a really inspiring day. It's been really refreshing to hear about the internal facing policies that is happening across so many companies to really make substantive changes to the lives of employees. I'm just curious, in terms from a corporate perspective, do you see corporate social responsibility or your kind of CSR investments as a vehicle to really move the needle from being an embassy to an advocate, if that makes sense?
Who'd like to come in on that? Harry?
I can speak from the perspective of a firm that helps people with their recruitment initiatives, and creating firms which have environments which are inclusive undoubtedly attract and retain, which is very important in this region, retain their employees a lot more readily. And there are so many statistics and so many studies that have been done to prove this, that we are easily able to get the message across to people that we're speaking with, that if their inclusivity policies are not well enough developed and are not attractive, they'll fail to be an employer of choice. So there is a message that we can get across to people, and with the organizations that we work with, which typically are the larger international firms, but not always. We can talk about best practices that we observe with our other clients, with the firms that do it well, and talk about the difference that it makes, particularly to a younger generation. I think people of the older generation, there are a couple of issues. I mean, firstly, they're typically more senior, so less concerned about that than they are about the career opportunity. But for people who are coming up the ladder, the millennials that we talk about all the time, they won't accept organizations which don't create safe environments, that don't create inclusive environments. So that's something that in our industry we can help with, and that's one of the reasons why we embarked on this particular journey. We're dealing with the internal issues, which I think most organizations here do, but we're also looking to be able to influence externally in the same areas.
Okay, great. And we had a question over the back here.
Hi, Paul Choi from Goldman Sachs. I have two questions. The first question is about how important your local workforce is for you. So look at the panel, all of you are the very senior guys in your organizations. How important do you think next time you have a similar panel, you want someone from a local workforce to represent your company sitting there? And if yes, how would you do that from this time to next year, this time, to enable this to happen? Secondly, the same question, and maybe to all of you as well. I think Mark talked a little bit about your commitment to bring people together to influence the government. So it may not be a fair question, but great power comes with great responsibility. So I'm trying to hold you accountable. So if you want to hold yourself accountable to make one change in either your organization or to the community that you service, what would be that commitment that you want to hold yourself accountable? It can be just meet a gay person or empower another, but just one thing. So what will you make yourself accountable to improve LGBT inclusion in the environment that you worked in?
Okay, Mark, I'll give you a minute to think about your answer, and I'll distract the audience with the other panelists for a minute. So, I mean, Maureen and Harry, on the question about how can we get more local senior employees actually sitting on stage being advocates, is that a barrier in your organisations now? And if it is, how do you think we might overcome it?
It is, undoubtedly. I mean, we always talk in our D&I council, we always talk about the fact that the Pride group, we're the invisible minority, because we walk in the door and nobody can tell that we're a member of the LGBT community. And the issue that we have in our firm, and I know it's very commonplace here, is that most people who do walk in the door don't share that. Statistically, we have to have far more people than are out in the firm. And we're very conscious of that. So to the question about how do we improve things in Asia, and firstly, do the local employees matter? And then what can we do to improve it? Yes, of course they matter. And getting somebody who's from Hong Kong or from our Singapore office in Singapore or from our Indian offices in India to be on this stage is very important to us. The commitment that we can make to try to change that is to improve the environment, to make it explicitly inclusive in every way that we can. And despite the fact that in Asia we have such a small representation in the group, is to just keep pushing and just keep trying to make it happen, make it easier for people to eventually come out. There are a number of different things that we're doing to try to help with that. It really does matter, because it can't always be somebody like me sitting on the stage talking about this topic.
Mm-hmm. And Maureen, how do you find getting your local management to be advocates?
I already have a lot of talent that is very open, so perhaps not yet at the most senior levels, at least not local, but the bench strength is very big. Yeah. So yeah, I could make a commitment that we will have someone on stage here.
Okay, all right. Oh well, yeah, we'll put you down for next year.
Okay. Okay.
+1.
Okay.
And Mark, have you come up with your cross to bear for the next 12 months?
You know, one thing I've learned is don't come up with good ideas, because you get landed with jobs. We're absolutely committed to all of the people that work in our organization. And I think that, you know, what's inspired me from today is really understanding the ways that different companies are approaching this. And I think there's no doubt that we can do more to try to encourage people to be more actively engaged, let's put it that way, in the inclusion and diversity panels and the work that the team does. You you know, if I had to say what could I do that would make a difference outside of my own organization, I think it would be to try to at least build one of these alliances. Maybe within our apparel industry might be a good place to start. I'd say there's a sort of alliance building within the American Chamber because of like-minded organizations. But I think that would be my commitment to try and find my hunting pack.
Yeah.
And at least in one small way, if it's 2 or 3 or 5 companies, it's something, and it might inspire other people to do the same.
The alliance point, I think, is a good one. I have to say, when it was brought up earlier in the day, it resonated with me actually as well, thinking it is a good way to maybe make it easier and more effective to take action.
And people feel a bit safer in that group. I think someone earlier said that. You just feel safer in that group environment. And by the way, PVH also signed the UNHR declaration last week. So
Okay, great.
we get applause as well.
Well, yeah, well, actually, the one thing I've enjoyed about today is getting some actual things I can go back into the office and try and implement. Actually, Harry, I've written down your including explicit language in policies as we review them, and I think actually I need to check in and see whether we've signed up with the UN principles either. I hope we have, but if we haven't, maybe that should be our commitment that we'll do it by next year, or of course, hopefully sooner. We've just got 3 minutes left, so I don't know if the last person wants to raise their hand. Yeah, it's table in the middle.
Hi, David Williams from PwC. Earlier you mentioned a bit about the cost of labour here now getting to the levels of New York or higher, and also the issue of the court case around visas. I'm just wondering what are some of the costs to business of not having that visa access for same-sex partners, and what are the workarounds that you have to think about?
Well, they have a choice, right? Talent has a choice of where to work. And I remember you have a lot of data as the economist on that, what the actual cost is. And I never forget the example you said where it actually is in the US a lot better for people to work in Texas for income tax and whatever, yet they go to the most expensive state because they have these liberties in California. So if you don't have the freedoms here and you have a high cost of living, if you're a talented boy or girl, you're going somewhere else. I think that is the cost. You miss out on talent. Hong Kong is going to miss out on their local talent if they have opportunities elsewhere where they can also afford a house. You know, so it is a very simple economic calculation. Whatever is coming out of universities, they're smart. They'll think twice.
Yeah, there's studies around that try to sort of put a dollar value on inclusion and diversity. Yeah, that's why, for me, it's slightly different. That's why it's a carrot and a stick. The Hong Kong government is out there trying to project itself as the place to invest, the place to be, the future smart city. They want to be that bridge into China now, and as well as the bridge out of China. If they really want major corporations to come here and invest their money into Hong Kong, and it's not cheap, which is the point I was trying to make, then I think that they have to have policies themselves that are inclusive and reflect the values of the corporations they're trying to attract. And you know, to my colleague's point over there, I don't think we're foreigners interfering with local politics. You know, I think we're stakeholders in Hong Kong who employ significant numbers of people in this country, and to that extent, I do believe we have a voice, and we should be talking about these issues more publicly.
Great. Well, thanks very much to my panel for a really practical discussion. I've written down a few takeaways. I'm sure a lot of the audience have as well. Please join me in thanking Maureen DeRooij from AB and AMRO, Harry O'Neill from Heinrich, Maureen from PVH.